Okay, awesome. Thank you all for your patience while we figured out some issues in our council chambers. And I think we have them all resolved. And I'll just give my colleagues a moment to gather back in the chambers before I start introductions. But given I see all my colleagues to my left, how about we start to the left, on my furthest left, and we'll make our way down the dais.
Good afternoon, Robin Kinich, at large.
Good afternoon, Deborah Ortega, the other council at large member.
Good afternoon, Kevin Flynn, Southwest Denver District 2.
Good afternoon, Paul Cashman, South Denver District 6.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
Jamie Taurus, District 3.
Candy Cedevaca, District 9.
Good afternoon, Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
Chris Hernan, District 8.
All right, with that, I'm Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval, the chair of the committee. And thank you all for joining us, and thank you for giving us patience. And we have a robust agenda ahead of us. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we will be sharing to go over the community report that we got from our facilitator. And then we will go into discussion about the merits of each map. So with that, I don't know if TS has the PowerPoint in front of them, and if not, I can share it. No. Okay. Thank you, Everyone has patience. So even though we may not have the PowerPoint in front of us, I can get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So if we have to, we can go back through, but I shared the PowerPoint with our event producers, so maybe they might be able to share it with everybody on Channel 8 or on Zoom. And I can also share it with my colleagues if you need it in front of us, because I don't think it's uploaded in Granicus. So we have the community meetings report summary. It was sent out this weekend, and it should be on the Legistar for, oh, perfect, thank you so much. We're on slide 2. Perfect, thank you. So the community meeting report summary was sent out. We had 6 meetings, 2 virtual, 4 in person, over 389 participants. We had about 36 individuals who attended the multiple meetings throughout the city. 54 neighborhoods were represented, and it was facilitated by GBSM. Next slide, please. So council received weekly reports from GBSM facilitators about each week's meetings. The report was finalized March 4th and shared with City Council members March 5th, and the report will be added to the Redistricting website for public viewing. Next slide, please. Meeting 1, which was February 2nd, held via Zoom, had 92 registrants, 36 survey response. Important factors by ranking were not separating neighborhoods, maintaining community diversity, connection to a city council person, and creating clear borders. The way that the maps ranked on that public meeting were 1D, 2 came in second was A, third was E, fourth was B, fifth was C, sixth was F. Next slide. Meeting 2 also had to be held on Zoom due to COVID. It had been initially at Mount Ballo High School, but we had to pivot and it was on COVID. We had 206 registrants. We had 81 responses. Once again, what was important during that meeting, the feedback we got, were keeping neighborhoods whole, maintaining community diversity, connection to their current city council member, and not separating school boundaries. The ranking of the map during the survey of which map was more preferred was, in first place was map A, second map D, third map B, fourth was tied for E and F, and fifth was C. Next slide, please. Meeting 3 was on a Saturday at Cook Park Recreation Center. We had 15 attendees, 11 people filled out the survey, and what was important to the people who attended that meeting on February 12th was maintaining community diversity, not separating neighborhoods, a connection to the current city council representative, and maintaining clear defined borders and not separating school boundaries. And in that survey, the maps were for first, A and D were tied, second was B, third was F and E, and fourth was C. Next slide, please. Meeting 4 was on at All Saints Parish Hall. We had 13 attendees, 14 people filled out the surveys. Once again, we see a theme here by keeping neighborhood wholes, maintaining clear and defined borders, maintaining community diversity, and not separating school boundaries. So I think all of these meetings so far have had the same themes. The map ranking order, first was C and D map, second was map B, third was F and A, and fourth was E. The 5th meeting was in the middle of a little bit of a late coming snowstorm, and we still had a pretty good attendance given the weather. It was at Lake Middle School. We had 14 attendees. We had 13 survey responses. And at that meeting, what we heard from community by ranking was not separating neighborhoods, maintaining community diversity, maintaining clear defined borders, and not separating school boundaries. At that particular meeting, the preference for the maps ranking was first E, second was A and D, third was E, fourth was F, and fifth was C. I think there might be a typo in that one, but we'll fix that. And the last meeting was meeting 6 at Manual High School. We had 60 attendees. Only 25 people filled out the survey responses. At that meeting, we heard also not keeping neighborhoods whole, not separating neighborhoods, maintaining community diversity, not separating school boundaries, and maintaining clear connection to current council representatives. The map ranking order at that meeting was first E, second A, third was D, F and C came in fourth, and in fifth was B. So we asked, I think it was Councilman Taurus asked for us to have an averaged. So out of all the meetings that we had, map A had 72 responses with 41%. Map D had 40 responses, 23. Map E had 36 responses with 21. Map B, 15 responses, 9%. Map F had 7 responses with 4, and map C had 2. And important factors, as we saw throughout this slideshow, 51% of the respondents, 71 had not separating neighborhoods, so keeping neighborhood whole, 51% of the people filling out the community survey, that was their preference. Maintaining community diversity, connection to current council representative, 8%, 11, and maintaining clear defined borders was also 11 with 8%. Next slide, please. So the discussion themes across all the maps, and this is aggregated through everything, was there was a constant talk about gerrymandering and how important to not have a map that was gerrymandered. keeping neighborhoods intact and keeping neighborhoods together or whole, integrating community feedback, that was a consistent theme that I heard, equity, continuity, accessibility of public engagement, and then we also talked about at many of the meetings what it would need to happen to change the city charter to increase the number of council districts. We also had questions on using projected population growth and creating maps, condensed nature of the public engagement and voting process, which this is a 3-month process, which usually it's 8 to 9 month process. So I think all of us up here understand that when President 45 released the census data late, that it's created a domino effect for all municipalities. So we were not the only municipality impacted by the condensed timeline. Diversity of constituents and representation, and a majority-minority districts. Next slide, please. So now here, once again, to remind all of us what our map vetting rules are. And these are pertaining to the charter. We're to draw 11 council districts, have the council district be as equal in population as possible, have the council districts contain contiguous territory, council districts must be as compact as possible, council districts must contain whole elections precincts, and council must have this approved by March 29th, 2022, when we have the final public hearing. Next slide, please. In our resolution that we passed in September, here's other guiding values that City Council voted on. The largest council district cannot be more than 10% larger than the smallest council district. That does not mean the population within each council district. It means the largest population of the 11 and the smallest population of the 11. Race and ethnicity shall be taken into consideration to the extent necessary to comply with the Voting Rights Act, and district lines must follow obvious geographic boundaries to the greatest extent possible. Next slide. So this is also from the resolution that we adopted in September, so that we would preserve logical communities of interest and the core existing constituents traditionally represented by a particular council district to the greatest extent possible. And once again, we always use that language, greatest extent possible, because as we know, some of our communities will be split, such as Montbello, that has a lot of voters and a pretty big neighborhood. District lines, to the greatest extent possible, will not result in 2 incumbent district council members residing in the same district. And district lines will respect collegial and statistical neighborhood boundaries to the greatest extent possible. And I believe that's also feedback that we heard through the process. And with that, that's the end of the PowerPoint. Do any of my colleagues have questions on the community report or anything that we went over in the slides? Councilwoman Ortega, go ahead. And remember to turn your mic on and speak clearly into the mic.
So this is just a point of clarification on slide 10. So the map preference, that's everybody picking their number 1 map, right, that came and gave input, because they may have given feedback on other maps, but in terms of indicating their preference, is that
correct?
Okay.
Yep. And also, it should be noted that due to Zoom,
Right.
the 2 Zoom meetings, we could not see which they were anonymous.
Right.
So we don't know if multiple people voted multiple times on one individual map. That was something that hindsight's 2020.
Right.
We should have prepared better for.
Yeah, I know that was one of the questions I had asked, if we had a way to track that, and I know we didn't, because I know there was one evening where I just kept the, I don't remember the name of the software,
Minty?
the page,
Yep.
where people could go in and make comments next to the maps. And I was up pretty late that night, and I think it was open till midnight, and people were still on making comments that late.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just needed that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councilwoman Sita Baca, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of the opposite question on that very last meeting. Well, most of the in-person meetings had very little participation. And so on that last meeting, there were a lot more people in the room than completed the survey. Do you have any kind of explanation or theories about why that happened?
I don't.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so next up is what we wanted to talk about and go over was each individual map. So over the weekend, we want to discuss the merits of each map and what they look like. So I will give the floor, I'll go alphabetically through each of the maps, and I'll give each council member about 7 minutes to talk about your map. And then I will also do probably about 7 minutes of discussion on each map. So with that, we'll start with map.
May I ask a point of clarification?
Yes, of course.
The maps we're going to see, are they different from the maps that are on the council webpage that shows map A through D?
So currently, we were just going to go through the sponsored maps.
Right.
Our central staff who had been working with me on this, unfortunately, is out today. And so I don't know if TS had the ability to add the new maps onto our council dashboard. They should, but I don't see them on there currently right now.
Yeah, I've got them open, and it looks like they're the maps that the public got to give feedback to, and I know a lot of people made changes to them last week, so that's why I'm asking what maps we're going to be looking at.
So I just got an update from Emily and our central staff and saying that the maps were updated onto the city council website. So I'm trying to go there now.
Madam Chair,
I've
Yes,
got
ma'am.
if I could chime in the dashboard, they're updated, but the PDFs might
Mine's
not
not
be
opening
updated.
them for
I'm
some
sorry?
reason. It's not opening. I'm looking on my laptop where
Oh,
I'm seeing it.
so on the dashboard, they're
Yeah.
updated? Okay, I get what you're saying. Okay. So I could put, if you go, so for those who are following, if you go to our city council redistricting website and you go to the main page and you go to the first tile, it says council sponsored maps. If you open that and you go down below the PDFs, it says view proposed district maps dashboard. Please click on that link. And they are under, it says plan source, all public and council. They are updated on there.
Thank you.
And so if it would be easier, we could share the screen. Emily is willing to share her screen so we could see the maps visually while we talk about them. Yes, please, Emily, if you could share your screen to talk about the maps, that would be great. I appreciate that. And once again, thank you all for the flexibility. Okay, so we will start with alphabetical order, and we will start with map A, which is sponsored by Councilwoman Cedabaka. Councilman Cedabaka, you have 7 minutes to talk about your map, and then we'll go into a discussion for about 7 minutes.
Thank you very much.
And can you please turn your mic on, and you have to talk directly into it?
My mic is on.
Okay.
Can you hear?
A little
Okay.
bit.
So if Emily could turn on the majority by block, race and ethnicity 2020. There were a couple of maps that I took into consideration. In a city like Denver that's rapidly gentrifying, I would think that our most important equity goal would be to give people who are being erased from the city an opportunity to legitimately protect themselves. And so in a context where neighborhoods are changing very quickly, and perhaps you can toggle back and forth from 2010 to 2020 on this map, so you can see, if you notice, this is the 2020 map. She's going to toggle back to 2010. When you look at the colors, the green blocks on the map are majority by block Latino. The peach colors are majority by block white, and the yellow are majority by block Black. And so you'll see this map here in 2010 showed us very different neighborhoods than what we have now in 2020. So back in 2010, you'll see that Park Hill, there's a lot of yellow over there. In North and South Park Hill, there's a lot of yellow over there. suggesting to us that, or proving to us that back then, those were majority Black neighborhoods. Same in the green areas at the northern part of the map and down on the left, bottom, southwest, and up in the northeast. We have a lot more green and a lot more yellow, meaning a lot more Latino and a lot more Black populations. Now, if you toggled back to 2020, I tried to draw along those lines because in our last redistricting process, we broke up the Black and brown voting blocks that we are historically used to. And so my goal was to unite those Black and brown voting blocks, knowing that these are marginalized communities with very little political power, especially electoral power. And so the reason that you unite in the context of redistricting is to give a population a chance at electing a representative who reflects their values, their voices. And research suggests that you have to have more than 30% of a particular population to meaningfully sway or play in an election. And so that's why I drew this map, to make sure that we gave Black and brown voices power, electoral power, to elect representatives that shared their interests. It did move north a little bit, and it captured a small part of District 1, or the current District 1, which is a majority Latino community in Chaffee Park, and it goes down a little bit. And that was not to harm Councilwoman Sandoval's district, but to allow this minority voice to be a majority rather than the minority voice in their District 1 setting currently. I also moved slightly right or to the east on my Park Hill boundary. It's a very small slice of population there that's relatively new because we recently added affordable housing there on the corner. And so it didn't encroach too far to the east because I had the same goal in District 8 to protect a minority majority. Unfortunately, it was much more challenging in District 8 because, as you know, our Central Park neighborhood, formerly known as Stapleton, is majority white, and that is a very heavy voting presence in this district. In looping in East Colfax on the south part of District 8, I wanted to make sure that they had a population where they had some shared interests around displacement, around being immigrant populations, around being people of color. And so that is why I looped them in and tried to keep them with as close to similar interests as possible. Another piece of my map that has been somewhat controversial to some is the southern part of my map. And the southern part of my map really attempted to change what we understand as protected communities. We have often, if you ever look at historical maps, and you can check my Facebook for all of them since the 60s, we've left District 4 down there kind of isolated and in a protected way, sheltering it from absorbing any of the challenges of the urban core. And so I think that to evolve fairly as a city, stretching those southern districts upward into the center makes sense, so that the representatives of those districts are also sharing in the responsibility of our growing and changing city. One of the most important layers that I factored in for this divide, Emily, if you'll toggle to the poverty map. This poverty map suggests to us that there are two very different populations that have been in the current District 4 and current District 6 that have not necessarily had the voice that they could use to represent their interests. And so my lines go almost perfectly along these maps that show us where we have very high concentrations of people who are low income, living in poverty. And it allows that southern district that was once one district to be broken up into two distinct districts that have very distinct communities of interest living in them. This was not to disturb Councilwoman Kendra Black's district nor Councilman Cashman's, but to really give more clear lines of potential interests that would be represented. It's hard to see District 10 in the past, but if you'll note it, if you look at historical maps, you can see that it's not necessarily stretching inappropriately southward. It does stretch southward. It's just stretching in a direction that makes sense for the population it's connected to. I wanted to make sure that when we stretch the District 10 boundaries, that they weren't necessarily east toward East Colfax, because I think that you have a very different population on East Colfax than you do along the rest of the Colfax corridor. And so I wanted to make sure that it was more appropriately stretched southward to allow those communities to have the representation that they need when they're sharing in the same interests. The other slightly controversial change that I made in my map was to District 2, which is the
Councilwoman,
bottom left corner.
That's about 7 minutes. I give you actually 7.5.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, now we can talk about the merits of Map A, or any questions or comments or concerns from my colleagues. And please go through the queue. First up, we have Councilwoman Taurus.
No, that was from the last.
Is that from the
conversation.
last?
Yep, sorry
Okay.
about that.
Do we have any questions or comments about Map A? Councilwoman Sawyer?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Councilwoman Sitabucca, for this map. I think it's really reflected. You walked through a lot of really meaningful. Can you hear me? Do I need to go louder?
Yeah, I had to speak like
Is this
super
better?
close.
Okay. Apologies. We're having some mic trouble in chambers today. So really appreciate Map A and the thoughtful ways that you approached it. My concern with Map A is around the splitting up of neighborhoods. So one of the main things that we heard as an important piece of feedback amongst community members at all of the different events, my staff and I only attended 4 of the 5, but based on the information that was provided to us, it looks like the 5th one had the same sort of response. So that's not splitting up neighborhoods. And so how, I guess my question for you is, how are you prioritizing the feedback or that piece of feedback, given that Map A does split up a number of neighborhoods significantly?
Yeah, and that was probably the hardest thing to do because, you know, while most people don't currently know where their district boundaries end, and crossing the street, regardless of whether or not you have a map line down it, doesn't really make a difference in your life. I thought it was important to, again, look at those different communities of interest. If you toggle on and off several of these maps, I think one of the more important ones is household median income. When I split the maps trying to make sure that people with like incomes were with each other. Because I think in the context of gentrification, there are natural interests that diverge along income lines. And so when I split my 5 Points neighborhood, for example, that one was split along those income lines and those racial lines. And it's because there was an article in the news today about 5 Points changing. And when you look at the 5 Points neighborhood and physically walk through it, you're walking from a neighborhood that once had housing projects, and you're crossing over into multi-million-dollar homes just across the street. And so when we have people from the 5 Points neighborhood coming in to represent their interests on an issue, I drew the line based on where I typically see the interest line split within my own district. On the Park Hill one, Park Hill's tough because it's several Park Hills within a Park Hill. And that first map that I showed you from 2010 showed a majority African-American Black population in all of our Park Hills. And that was the natural, that was the history and the migration pattern of the Black community in our city. And we've unfortunately been forced to move more northeastward. And so I cut along those racial lines in Park Hill. One, I kept the white slice on my side so as not to completely dilute the chances for East Colfax and Montbello to have as much of a minority presence as possible. But I cut off North Park Hill and South Park Hill from both District 8 and District 9 because that is now a majority white population. If you toggle on to that block, majority by block map, you can see in 2020, those are very different neighborhoods than we remember of 2010. And so that's kind of my thinking around how I drew those lines.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Appreciate that. And I apologize. I know I saw an email come through about the size disparity, and I believe it was from the city attorney's office, and I cannot remember what it said at this moment. This map goes outside of the requirement or the in our resolution, right? That there's a 10%. There's
Deviation.
no more than 10% swing between the lowest and highest council district population. Is that correct? I'm asking Angela's going to answer.
So Anshul Baga, Legislative Council. You guys can all see the map on the redistricting project. Website. It looks like to me that the maximum percentage is 5.3, the minimum percentage is 4.2. The sum has to be less than 10%. So this seems to meet that requirement.
It's
Okay.
there were issues originally, and I fixed those, and so now it's within those parameters.
Got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure that it cleared up in my mind. Apologies. Again, I know I saw an email about it, but I could not remember what it said. Okay, so this map does fall within those parameters now. Awesome. Okay, I think, Emily, is it possible to just pull up, I know that there was an overlay, and sorry, Zach. I know that there was an overlay that had the schools and rec centers identified, and I just wanted to take a look at that on this map. Did you, Councilwoman Sita Baca, take those locations into consideration as well?
Absolutely, and that one's a challenging one because in our inverted L neighborhoods, you have to stretch pretty far to get to a regional rec center, or you have to stretch pretty far to get to a park, a large park. And so part of what I was trying to do was make sure that everyone had at least a viewable mass of green space in their district, because not all of them are perceptible on these maps, like you can't see them all. But I took that into consideration when I looked at this. And if you turn off all the lines, you can kind of see where some of our lines did cross intentionally to keep parks in park deficient places.
Okay. Did it move any? Did this when you drew the lines? Did it move schools into different council districts than they're currently in?
I think it probably did, but our lines don't match school district lines.
Right, I know that. But for example, I do a lot of work with Hill Middle School, and so I'm curious whether, I know other council members also work with middle schools in their districts as well, so I'm just curious whether it changed that, removed that, and if so, how?
No, I mean, I did not try to protect school district lines. I've worked with youth my entire career and work with schools in all of your districts and would regardless of whether my line cut them out or not. So I did not factor that one in because I think the nature of school choice suggests that our kids in our neighborhoods are not going to our neighborhood schools anyway. And so my kids are all the kids in our city.
Okay. I'm going to disagree with you on that. As a parent of a sixth grader, I can tell you that's not the same over on our side of on District 5, but good to know that is something that you think is happening in District 9. Thanks. I'm done.
Thank you. Councilman Taurus?
Thank you. Councilman Sedebaca, so your map hasn't changed
No.
at all, and so I'm wondering why not?
My map changed the first time when I was told that it had to match the the largest to the smallest, that number had to add up, and so I changed it to factor that in. I kept some of our districts, including yours and mine, originally a lot smaller because that's where I expect our undercounts to be and where some of the most projected growth is. And so when I switched those boundary lines to accommodate that largest to smallest number, it was your district and my district that primarily grew a little bit within those parameters. And my district, I've talked to different communities, and given the conversations that we've had, there are seven sponsors on Map D. I've worked with community members to create another draft, an alternative draft, and have asked for it to be published tentatively several times. Emily can speak to that. It has not shown up on this dashboard. I'm not sure why. And we wanted it to show up because we wanted to use the layers in order to determine if we were still protecting the communities of interest that I've identified.
So map A is not your current map?
That's the map that I would like to go with. We have asked to be able to see tentative maps with these layers and not have been able to.
I can answer that. What our process was to have the dashboard be our final location for final maps. It's too confusing to have the maps come up and down in such a truncated process. And I've heard throughout the entire process that this process is confusing. And once again, to have a map go up for a short period of time and then come down, I don't think that that's what the dashboard was created for. The dashboard was created to place our final map. So it wasn't Emily's call. It was my call as the chair that everyone had to go through the process. Everyone had to use the maptitude. And once you had your final map, we would submit it to the dashboard so that it was the final map. So we didn't want it to go up for a couple days, to come down for a couple days, to go back up for a couple days. It's the place to have your final map submitted.
Well, there's your answer.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilman Herndon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. I just want to make a comment. And when we passed that resolution earlier in September, we were talking about the importance of compactness. And I think I just wanted to explain why that's important. And when you speak to gerrymandering, one of the great tools to minimize it is compactness. And looking at this map, while Councilwoman Sedebaca does give reasons for elongating and stretching out districts, it can lead to gerrymandering, in my opinion. And so I think it's important when we are looking at maps to make sure we can keep districts as compact as possible. So that is a way that we can ensure that we are minimizing the element of gerrymandering. And I appreciate Councilwoman Sawyer speaking to separating neighborhoods. For my District 8, Northeast Park Hill was a community of interest. And in this particular map, it seems to be split into two districts, District 8 and District 9. And I don't know if my colleagues received the letter from the Greater Park Hill community where they were hoping that Park Hill could have one representative. And in every map, that's not the case, and they wrote pros and cons of each of them. So that's just a challenge that I see in the Park Hill community. And also noting, and I don't want to speak for Council President Gilmore, but for District 11 to go from Central Park all the way out to the airport, again, we're creating these elongated districts, which I think takes away the sentiment of compactness, which I believe is really important. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just make a comment that in before the current map, our current council boundaries, Chaffee Park and Sunnyside were split prior into Council District 9 and Council District 1. And in 2015, Chaffee Park and Sunnyside became whole. And the people in those two neighborhoods did know which side of Zunai they lived on. They understood if they lived on the east or the west side of Zunai. And the east side of Zunai did not have any parks. They didn't have parks in Sunnyside, hardly, and they had no park in Chaffee Park. The Zunai Park was in Council District 9, and I heard when I was working for my predecessor from 2015 and 2016 that it did matter. For the first time ever, Chaffee Park Registered Neighborhood Organization organized in 2015 and created a registered neighborhood organization. Prior to that, they had felt fractioned and split. And so they did know their boundaries, and they feel very concerned with being split again, especially the Sunnyside community. Chaffee Park would remain whole under this current map in Council District 9, but Chaffee Park was very concerned about being split once again on a map. And several people in Northwest Denver in District 1 do know which boundary lines they are. I have that oftentimes. I share a boundary with Councilwoman Taurus, and people are constantly asking if they're in Council District 1 or Council District 3. So with that, we will move on to Map B, which is sponsored by Councilwoman Taurus.
Thank you. And I want to preface how Map B came to be. And it was because I've considered this process iterative. It is constantly taking input and modifying and taking more input and modifying. So the original Map B was very much influenced by the early communities of interest input that we got. And for West Denver, that was about 19 comments that very clearly said they wanted Valverde and Athmar Park included in a West Denver district. And so I wanted to honor that feedback and really tried as much as possible to grow a citywide map around that community of interest, in addition to other communities of interest that we were given early feedback around. So that was how Map B really originated. And I got some great feedback and really trying to be responsive to what folks said. Here is why I'm withdrawing Map B and working on an alternative map. One is the feedback that East Colfax should be in District 8. There was a lot of echo around East Colfax wanting to be connected to other NEST neighborhoods and communities, and NEST is the Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Team. So it's a lot of collaborative coalition building, organizing that's happening between communities, and I wanted to be able to honor that. It was that the way that District 10 was drawn, it drew Country Club and Jefferson Park across I-25 into the same district. There was a lot of clear feedback that that was not desirable. It was that West Colfax wanted to be whole as a whole neighborhood, given the variety of things that the growth, the Colfax corridor, the variety of projects that are happening in that neighborhood, wanting to be in a single district. It was that Lowry and Windsor wanted to be in District 5, and ongoing concerns about future and upcoming developments in that area. It was that Lama Lincoln Park has experienced whiplash in whose council district they're in from one redistricting time to another, and finally feeling connected and that they've got a relationship to other neighborhoods, to a council office, wanting to stay connected to District 3. The other was that wanted to be able to unite Washington, Virginia Vale as a neighborhood. It's got some funky precincting that's going on there, and so that became a desire. So independent of what I desire in my Map B, There are a variety of citywide things that I was taking into consideration. Could I tweak map B enough to meet those? Maybe not. So I'll look forward to talking about the merits of an amended map that I'll be co-sponsoring next.
Thank you, Councilman Taurus. Next up, we have map C, which is been sponsored by Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know that I'll need 7 minutes. I know that from the public input, map C ranked near the bottom almost every meeting, except for the one in my district in Southwest Denver. I like to think that that's because it makes too much sense, and that this is a political process where sense sometimes is secondary to political considerations. I started my map with one premise, and that is, I took a look at this council. Are we all here? All here but Councilwoman Black. I took a look at this council and I realized that right now, the 2015 map almost perfectly represents the demographics of Denver. There are 13 members, 2 of them citywide at large, so let me leave them aside for a second. The 11 district seats have 6 members who are white and 5 who are persons of color, 4 Latinas and 1 black man. Denver's population is 54.3% white. The 6 of the 11 members constitute 54.5% of the seats. 4 of the district seats, or 36.3% of the seats, are held by Latinas. The Latino population of Denver is 27.9%. 1 seat is held by a black member, or 9.1% of the 11 seats. Denver's black population is 8.5%. When we consider the 2 at-large seats, one of the at-large members is a Latina, Councilwoman Ortega. The other is the council's first out LGBTQ member. This city, in the last 10 mayoral elections, the last 40 years, has elected a mayor of color. 6 of those elections, in a city that is less than 10% black, 6 of those elections have elected a black mayor. This electorate is a very progressive and a very involved electorate, and they have given us a council that reflects what the city looks like. So I started with the premise that I should make the fewest changes on the margin to that 2015 map that came out of the 2010 census to reflect the changes that have occurred since then. And so I would change a precinct on the margin here and there in order to preserve that balance. 3 of the 5 district members of color, 3 of them, council members Sandoval, Sitabaca, and Herndon, were elected by a majority white electorate. 3 of them, the majority, 3 of the 5, were elected by a majority white electorate. I was elected in a majority minority district, twice. Denver is a city where the voters look at the candidate. And so I think I approached map C thinking that the fewest changes would be the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. We have 1 person in the queue, Councilwoman Sitabaca. Go ahead with your questions.
Just a question on your thoughts around District 8. So given that we're making very little changes to the map from 2015, and Councilman Herndon, our black member of council, was elected prior to many of the changes in our neighborhoods, what do you think the demographic changes in District 8 suggest for this open seat?
Thank you. I wouldn't want to speculate down the road, but that district has always elected, in my memory, has always elected a black representative. Councilman Herndon, just a year and a half ago, well, no, actually going on 3 years ago, was reelected in a field of 6 candidates outright on the first election, on the first ballot, without a runoff. I think it speaks very well of our voters. Like I said, in a city with less than 10% black population, we have elected a black mayor 6 times out of the last 10 elections. Twice we've elected a Latino, Federico Pena, and only in 2 elections did we elect a white mayor, and that was John Hickenlooper. Denver is it wasn't always this way, Councilwoman, but Denver voters, at least, seem to be very colorblind. You were elected, Councilwoman, by a majority white electorate. So was Councilman Herndon in both years, in both elections, and Councilwoman Sandoval and Espinoza before her.
And so your prediction is based on our past. Your prediction is based on your past knowledge, but not the future or the current demographics.
Thank you. That's because like no one else up here, I don't foresee the future. All we know about a prediction is that it will be wrong. We don't know if it'll be wrong to the good or wrong to the bad.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. Up next, we have Map D. And so I will go ahead, and I just have one question for the sponsors of Map D. Did you want to have one representative speak on Map D, or did each person want to have a couple minutes to chime in? I'll defer to you all, and so you all can make that executive decision.
Are we looking at the draft 2?
Yes. No, Map D withdrawn. Because we're going over the maps that we had public. The theme of this meeting is to talk about what the community feedback gave us, and then the next part we can go into the amended maps. So we would look at Map D withdrawn, and Councilman Herndon, I'll start with you, I think.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, and Councilman Flynn, you probably can't see over here, but Councilman Clark is not here either. And Councilman Clark actually was the main sponsor who drew Map D. So I will chime in for him because I pulled up the write-up, the summary that he did, just to hit the highlight for the particular districts. And I do know there was a change that Councilman Clark made in conversations with Councilmembers Sawyer and Cashman if they want to speak to that. But just some quick highlights about Map D, believing it takes into account this, what we talked about in our resolutions, compactness, et cetera. Quick highlights, District 1, West Colfax moves to District 3 to reunite neighborhoods and aligns with boundaries of the West area as shown in the MPI. District 2 gains College View community of interest, which also reunites historic constituency and aligns with boundaries of the Far Southwest Plan as drawn in the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. Gains West Colfax, District 3, gains West Colfax to reunite statistical neighborhoods, gains Auraria, gains Valverde, aligning with community of interest maps and aligning with boundaries of the West area as drawn in the MPI. No changes to District 4. District 5, East Colfax moves to District 8 to reunite neighborhood and aligns with East area and the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. Gaines Country Club and Cherry Creek. Mayfair Community of Interest stays together. Lowry Community of Interest stays together. District 6, Rosedale moves to District 7, reuniting a historic constituency. Gaines Belcaro to reunite statistical neighborhoods. District 7, College View moves to District 2, keeping community of interest together, reuniting historic constituency, and aligns with boundaries of the Far Southwest Plan that's drawn in the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. Gaines Rosedale united a historic constituency, makes Spears statistical neighborhood whole by moving Alamo Placida to District 7. District 8 gains East Colfax to reunite neighborhood and aligns with the East area, keeps Northeast Park Hill community of interest whole. North Park Hill and South Park Hill, those split, use the geographic barrier of Monaco as a district line. District 9 keeps 5 Points COI together. Union Station and Central Business District move to District 10. City Park and City Park West move to District 10. For District 10, gains Union Station with the geographic barrier of the railroad line serving as the district line. Gains Central Business District, makes Spear statistical neighborhood whole by moving Alamo Placida to District 7. And District 11, though Montbello is split, we only move one precinct in Montbello to District 8, taking into consideration community of interest and keeping Montbello as intact as possible. Green Valley Ranch community of interest stays together. So those were some of the highlights, and I see we both have Sawyer and Cashman, and if they want to speak to the conversation they had with Councilman Clark post the meetings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll start with Councilman Sawyer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know we'll talk about the changes to this map at our next meeting or potentially later today. So just wanted to flag for the public who might not be, as involved with these maps as we are, that Councilman Cashman and I did have a conversation with Councilman Clark. If you look at the sort of southern border of District 5, northern border of District 6, when the clerk's office re-precincted and took 51 precincts away from the city of Denver, what it did was split two neighborhoods in Southern District 5, Northern District 6, unexpectedly, right? We didn't know that those precincts were going to get much larger and separate the landmass a little bit more. So Councilman Cashman and I took a look at some of the different potential, feedback we had received and some potential solutions. And essentially, it's a flip. So what it does, it would sort of, in a very basic explanation, which I'm happy to go into further when we talk about this more, make Leetsdale the southern border of Leetsdale Drive the southern border of District 5, northern border of District 6, so that we're keeping most neighborhoods whole, responding to the communities of interest feedback that we got with the different communities in Southern District 5, Northern District 6, particularly the Orthodox Jewish community. That is in that area now, and the requests from Windsor and Lowry to stay together as one neighborhood, as each one neighborhood in District 5. So happy to walk through it a little bit more, but just wanted to flag for the public that small change was made, and we can talk through it when we get further. But the sponsors of the map were supportive of it. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief because my colleagues, Councilman Herndon and Councilman Sawyer, have said most of my main points. The map, to me, had appeal because it honors the principle of compactness, but even more so in doing that, it maintains historic areas of interest that, while they may not have made themselves heard in this process, nevertheless, they exist. And I think this map does a great job of keeping these communities together. And I appreciate Councilmember Sawyer flagging the fact that the original version of this map split the Winston Downs and Washington, Virginia Vale neighborhoods and makes them whole. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Cashman. Councilman Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Councilman Herndon walking through some of the justifications for Map D. Want to also remind the community, and we have a lot of new folks in Denver as well, and the real story of Montbello. And it was a historic African-American community first. And then when Green Valley Ranch started to be built, a lot of historic Montbello community members bought homes or bought a second home in Green Valley Ranch. And so hearing from the community and their desire to make sure to try to bring Montbello back together, of course, that was my first objective. But due to the reasons stated already, that wasn't possible. And so then my priority became to ensure that the least amount of changes were made to the current District 11. And due to growth in District 11 and the way that the clerk redrew the precincts, it would mean that a small section, a small residential portion in the northeast corner of Montbello will need to move to District 8. And that was, again, because of the way that the precincts were drawn. And currently, the District 11 population from Piccadilly Road to Peoria is almost 81,000 people, which is well over the required goal of a little bit over 65,000 people per district. And I'd like to also put on the public record that from Chambers to Peoria alone is over 33,000 people. And in the community report, when I read it over the weekend, there were some comments that were false about Green Valley Ranch being less racially diverse. And so I want to make sure that for the public record, we can correct that. And so Montbello's demographics currently are Latino, 63.1%, white, 10%, black, 20.5%, and Asian, 2%. Green Valley Ranch's demographics, Latino is 41.3%, white is 19.2%, black is 24.8%, and Asian is 8.5%. And also a reminder, Green Valley Ranch and Montbello are both communities of interest. And so in the interest of having a compact, contiguous map that strengthens the voices of all people of color, that is why I co-sponsored with a majority of my colleagues, Map D. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other sponsors who would like to speak before we go into questions and comments? Seeing none, first up, Councilwoman Sitabaca, go ahead with your questions.
Thank you. Can you toggle on the layers for the block race? Councilwoman Gilmore, can you repeat those last statistics that you just gave? I needed a visual to understand what you were just saying.
Where would you?
You were saying that it was, what were you saying the breakdowns of Montbello were?
63.1 Latino and 20.5% black.
Okay.
And Green Valley Ranch is 41.3% Latino and 24.8, 25% black. And if Emily's doing this, if she could also put on the communities of interest lines, I think that would be helpful as well.
That is helpful. And so that blue block that's like broken up there in the middle, this is just people talking about wanting to reunite Montbello. And we had several people asking us why the number couldn't go over to stretch a little bit further. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity. You know, when you look at the demographics of Map A, and really the long arm that it creates down into Central Park, I think it's important that we also level set. The Central Park Northfield demographics are Latino 12.6%, white 68.2%, black 6.5%, and Asian 5.6%. And so really in comparing, since you're asking me these questions, Map D keeps the white representation pretty much at 15% for the map in Map D, which is consistent with District 11 now. The counter is in Map A. It increases the white population up to 20%.
What is your
in Map A?
Sorry about that. What is your, that's accurate. And it's because there's a principle in gerrymandering known as packing. And so Map A was attempting to unpack what is a very solid, reliable minority base in 3 and 11, because those are the corners that we inhabit. And so I'm curious to you, when we talk about breaking up neighborhoods, because that was a hot topic in my map, how do we cope with this broken neighborhood? What will be the lived experience that changes for the folks whose neighborhood is being broken up? What will be like the main thing that they understand to be different with their neighborhood broken up?
The neighborhood is currently split by 2 different council districts now. So nothing new is happening, by keeping a portion of Montbello in District 11 and a very, very small portion of Montbello in District 8. And so for continuity and compactness, it's already there. And to Council Pro Tem Torres's comment about constituents having whiplash around which district they reside in, I can speak from personal experience, and Council Member Herndon can certainly chime in, that it took about 2.5, 3 years of my first term for folks to understand that they perhaps weren't in the old historic District 11, that they were in now District 8, and the partnership between council members as colleagues is important as well. When you get elected, you are not on an island. You work with your colleagues. And so for all intents and purposes, I feel like the Montbello community, which the community that I've lived in and raised my 3 children in for the last 25 years, we have representation not only by the current District 11 representative, but also the District 8 representative and the 2 at-large members. And so essentially, they have 4 votes, 4 voices, 4 votes on the city council, and to count to 7 only takes consensus building amongst 3 additional members, and that community in Montbello has their voice heard. And so that's some of the thinking that went into this. I have never in my entire time of living in Montbello had anyone ask me or mention, even suggest, well, I think we would get better representation and we would get better advocacy if we worked with East Colfax to have representation, because a lot of the issues, a lot of the day-to-day occurrences along East Colfax are very different from the Montbello community. And you can ask any member of the Montbello community about, you know, if there is something that's happening up at the high school campus, everybody knows about it. I don't know if we would have that if there were events along another corridor that never historically has been part of the Montbello community.
Got it. So I'm hearing you saying that breaking up a neighborhood along similar interests isn't majorly disruptive. I'm also wanting to point out, and
I would prefer if you don't try to restate what I've already stated. I've stated it. I don't require you to restate it differently.
So what I'm understanding is that it is not majorly disruptive because it already exists. I'm also recognizing that both Map D and A break up the same neighborhoods, just along different lines. So Map D breaks up Park Hill and Montbello and City Park, correct?
Map D actually keeps a majority of the Montbello community together. Map A excludes a large southern portion of Montbello and puts it into District 8. And that is never what the Montbello community has said, that they want more of Montbello put into District 8, because the real perception is that District 8, with the demographics that I just read off of the Central Park neighborhood, is much more white. It's almost 70% white, and folks are concerned about that and feel like their voices would be stronger represented together versus trying to educate others about a different lived experience.
Agreed. So we both agree that diluting minority voice is not ideal, especially in the context of losing a majority minority seat.
We're
But I
going to
do
have
want
to
to
go
point
on.
out,
We have several other people in the queue, and we have 2 more maps to get through.
Got
so
it.
if you have a question, do you have any other questions?
can you confirm yes or no, do we break up in both maps, or in your map, is Park Hill Montbello, and City Park broken up in map D.
You can see it on the screen.
Well, for people who can't see it on the screen, we've got people listening too.
You can answer the question, you know the answer.
Yes, thank you.
Up next, we have Councilman Hines.
Thank you, Committee Chair. I just wanted to touch base about District 10 and its redrawing in Map D. With the current configuration, Map D is 82% white. It is the whitest district in the city, and part of what I enjoy about District 10 and Map D is that the representation is decreased to 70% white. It's very difficult because it is inside the inverted L and in the center of the city for it to be majority minority, but it is important for us to have diversity everywhere in our city. The one thing that I also see that District 10 has is that it really creates a community that is even stronger with multifamily representation. And so by removing Country Club, Cherry Creek, and Balcarra, which are predominantly single-family neighborhoods, and adding downtown, which is almost entirely multifamily, complementing Uptown, Cap Hill, Golden Triangle, and Cheeseman in the north side of Congress Park, there are only a few areas with single-family residents left, and those would be in City Park and City Park West. So I think that is a reasonable reasonable community. I would say the comment about whiplash. I know that there was a lot of confusion about where I lived. I know that there were chalk art on my block advertising for District 9, and that was really confusing. And even after we were elected, there was some confusion about whether my home was in District 10 or District 9. So there is, I think that it's a legitimate comment of whether whiplash is a thing or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilwoman Taurus.
Two quick questions, or one question, one comment. The question is for any of the sponsors to speak to the decision around the cuts to North Park Hill and South Park Hill, and if I could get a little bit more information about that. And then just a comment that City Park neighborhood, because of the way the precinct is drawn, they portioned out all of the residences of City Park. The park itself is in a precinct with the Skyland neighborhood. So if they pull the park in, it's either cutting the Skyland neighborhood in half, or if they only include the residences of City Park, it leaves the park in the other neighborhood, but in the same precinct. So just one of the oddities of the precincting map. But I did have that question about the North Park Hill and South Park Hill cut.
And Madam Chair, I can speak to that as a District 8 rep, as I was looking at what's the best way to redraw District 8. You know that you could not have all of Park Hill in one district. And so as we're looking at this, what's a natural geographic boundary? And in this particular, for Map D, it's Monaco. And for those who are more familiar with Park Hill than others, there are differences between, and I'll let Councilwoman Knitz correct me if I say anything that is different, east and west of Monaco. There are dividers and there are different issues affecting that. So for me, I thought that was a natural barrier. So if someone can say, okay, if I'm east of Monaco, I'm in Council District 8. If I'm west of Monaco, I'm in Council District 9. That's what I was looking for as I was trying to find a way to draw these boundaries, because we knew, because of the math, you could not have a Park Hill in one district. And I also will note too, there was conversations, Northeast Park Hill is a community of interest. And in this map, it stays whole. It is part of one district, and in other maps, it is not. So that's the answer, Councilwoman Torres, to why I support Map D and the way those boundaries came out. And I'll let, if somebody else wants to speak to the other portion, they can.
Anyone else? All right, we have one more comment, and then we're going to have to move on. Councilman Sidibaka?
Thank you. Can you unpack that? What do you think the residents on the on the District 9 side of Monaco have in common with the other District 9 neighborhoods versus Northeast Park Hill?
So I'm gonna focus on District 8 again, because there's no perfect map, and so if there was a perfect map, we would not have it here. So I'll speak again to why I created that boundary on Monaco. So I'm good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So next up, we have map E, and for those who are watching, it would be map E withdrawn. I have officially withdrawn this map, but I'll talk about this map in consideration given that we had public comment on that. So when I was looking at map E, I was thinking of what our resolution is, trying to keep as many neighborhoods as whole as possible. I was looking at our deviation, and I took into consideration our communities of interest. I feel like the pandemic has changed our ability to organize around certain areas. And Denver has historical organizing power. And I feel like that comes with certain neighborhoods being together over certain topics. So I really took into consideration different areas, such as when I was working for Council District 9 way back in the day in 2015, from 2012 to 2015, Auraria campus had a lot in common with La Alma Lincoln Park. Our current boundaries separate those two neighborhoods, and they felt like they were tied. The displaced Aurarians have a lot in common with La Alma Lincoln Park. I wanted to create those community whole. Although in West Denver, on West Colfax, we have 2 council representatives, which is very similar to what happens in Montbello, where I feel like we actually have 4 voices for that neighborhood. I felt like it was important to give that neighborhood the attention and have it under one council district. It is confusing along those areas, along the Gulch, to have 2 council members. And then in the other parts of the city, I do not know Council District 4 as well as I know Council District 1. I don't know Council District 5 as well as I know Council District 1. And so I attempted to keep the boundaries and the neighborhoods intact as possible. If anyone has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, but I will say that this map has officially been withdrawn from the public record. Seeing none, we will end with map F, and I'll let the sponsor talk about that process.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So map F, very similarly to the process that you just said, was really what I considered. So there are a number of communities of interest that residents of District 5 in particular identified, and residents of, for example, Northeast Park Hill. So I took all of the communities of interest information into account when my team and I were drawing our map. If you look at the southern border of District 5, for example, something we just talked about in map map D, it keeps this, in this map, it also keeps the Orthodox Jewish community whole. So this map essentially on the southern border of District 5 uses Alameda as the border. I didn't love that because George Washington High School is directly south of Alameda, and that would mean that it would be redistricted out of District 5 where it has historically been. And District 6 has would then have 2 high schools in it. It would have South High School and George Washington High School. So that was one consideration I was looking at. Northeast Park Hill, community of interest is one consideration I was looking at. Of course, as we've discussed many times now, Montbello has to be split, mathematically speaking, because of the larger precincts that were created by the clerk's office. And so everything sort of has to start at Montbello and then move out. So that's what we did. And then, took the feedback from the East Colfax neighborhood that they would prefer to be a single neighborhood and paired with Montbello and or Northeast Park Hill. They have since changed their request. They would like to be with Northeast Park Hill and then as much of Montbello as they can be with, which is representative in map D. And then, again, moving the border of Southern District 5 down to Leetsdale. I don't know the west side of the city as well, so I looked at a lot of the communities of interest there, tried to ensure that the map was drawn along clear borders so that people could kind of understand, as Councilman Herndon mentioned earlier, west of Monaco is this, east of Monaco is this. Councilman Herndon and I right now share East Colfax, and that one in particular gets a little confusing because with Colfax as the border, it's very clear, but nobody really knows, like, when you live in that neighborhood, how far, where East Colfax ends and Lowry begins, which the border is 11th, by the way. So anyway, taking all of the communities of interest information that we received into consideration, taking the sizes into consideration, the size requirements and compactness, et cetera, we really tried to draw a map that we thought made sense in terms of maintaining the sort of breakdowns that would need to be made. Want to also mention that I just don't love on the west side of District 8 that there's that kind of strange jog that happens in the map that I think will get confusing. So this is all to say that there were good reasons taking most neighborhood community feedback into consideration when drawing this map, or as much as we could based on the math. But I don't love it for a couple of different reasons I just mentioned, and so I have also chosen to withdraw this map. And I will, with the proposed changes that I mentioned before, support map D instead. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that feedback. And thank you all for this robust discussion. So I will have the sponsors of Plan D, Draft 2, which was an amended, just talk about their amendments just really quickly. And I know that Councilman Clark worked on this, but if you can take that over, Councilman Herndon, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, Madam Chair, I will give it a shot. And I believe that's what I spoke to earlier with the District 5, District 6 change. As I look at the map, I don't believe, and please, if sponsors or supporters, let me know if there's another change that I'm unaware of, but I believe the Plan D Draft 2 dealt with the precinct issue at the bottom of District 5 and the northeast, I believe, of District 6.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? Councilman Taurus?
Yeah, just to be clear, that's the only change between D and D amended?
Councilwoman Torres, since my apologies, Councilman Clark did those conversations, that's the only one that I am aware of. There may be another one, but I'm not aware of another one.
Okay, got it, thank you.
And if needed, we can, I believe Councilman Clark will be here next week, so we can have further that discussion. Next up, we will have Map E amended. Map E, it's called Map E Draft 2. And I will pass the mic to my sponsor with this, Councilman Taurus, and she and I can go back and forth.
Sure, thank you so much. So a lot of things weighed in on why starting with E as a base for me was important. One, I felt like it had a lot of strong community feedback in the public meetings. I also felt like there was tremendous opportunity to make amendments based on what community was interested in, and where they brought to light, I think, some really important concerns that they wanted us to be aware of that we might not have heard before. Emily, can you add the layer of DDPHE equity index? So I'll, if I can highlight just a couple of the changes that were made from the original E to this current draft. In District 5, the new draft makes Hilltop whole. It adds North Park Hill whole, South Park Hill whole to 5. It moves East Colfax to 8. This was important to keep as many neighborhoods whole if we can, and these were possible to keep whole and connected to Northeast Denver neighborhoods. Community in East Colfax advocated strongly to be a part of 8 and asked to ensure that all Park Hill neighborhoods stay whole. They are whole as individual neighborhoods, but they are not in one single district. That's an important distinction. We couldn't keep all 3 together, but we didn't divide them, and I think that's critical. For District 6, obviously, they moved out the Hilltop precinct, so they're no longer in Hilltop, but they do absorb one precinct of the University neighborhood from District 7 to make that neighborhood whole. In the original E, there was a little arm in 7 that went into the University neighborhood. So we removed that issue. And District 7, it moves obviously that precinct back to 6 where it can be made whole. District 8 adds East Colfax, like I mentioned, keeps Northeast Park Hill whole, and it mirrors the Montbello divide in Map D. And I didn't hear enough information from residents about how that line should be differently divided. So we erred on the side of continuity for that one as well. The other change, obviously District 11 mirrors that. Those are the changes between the original E and the amended E. And some of the equity considerations I think to keep in mind, I think it's one thing to track race and ethnicity. I think it's another thing when we talk about continuity of projects and issues that neighborhoods face. And the DDPHE equity index adds a lot more to the conversation including built environment, environmental concerns, walkability to grocery stores, to parks, a variety of different things. And we feel that this map allows for the organization around those issues to take place within these districts in ways that are able to both continue projects and elevate them. And this is an important reason why for me, keeping Valverde in District 3 becomes really critical because of the similarity of issues faced in Valverde that Sun Valley faces, that Loma Lincoln Park faces, that Barnum and Villa Park face at the Federal Boulevard corridor. So that collaboration opportunity became a really important context for keeping at least Valverde, and since we weren't able to keep Athmar in this map. I'll stop there if Councilwoman Sandoval wants to chime in.
Thank you, Councilman Taurus. Also, what we gave to consideration are zone districts. So we kept places that have single-family zoning a little bit higher, and where you have multi-zoning and higher zone districts, the ability to grow. And so that was one important aspect of, as we use the base layer E to look at, is we had potential to grow in these areas. For example, in Council District 3, in this proposed map, the River Mile, the build out of Elitch's will occur in the next 10 years, and it gives it the ability to grow. In Northwest Denver, we have station area stops, the 41st and Fox, that flanks District 9 and District 1. More growth and redevelopment is occurring currently in District 1 than the current District 9 station area stop because of some complicated next step studies and car trips. So I allow District 1 to continue to grow. We keep other areas of Denver. We keep District 11. I believe that I talked to the council members out in District 11 and 8, and they feel like a lot of the growth has already occurred in the last 10 years, and that they're going to continue to get some build out, maybe along Pena Boulevard, but it might not occur as much as it has in the last 10 years in Council District 8 and Council District 11. And so I was just we were doing our best to make sure that we were responding to some of the community feedback that we got in the report, and we were responding to the different maps that were sponsored and what were the pros, the benefits and the burdens to each of those maps, and we came up with this map. If there's any questions on this map, we're happy to take them at this time, or any comments. Councilwoman Kanich, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. colleague, sorry. So I wanted to, I'm catching up a little bit. I was out last week, and so this is the first time I'm getting a chance to compare the new map and the revised map D. They look very similar. So I was just curious if you could describe whether you considered supporting map D or what you think the key difference is, maybe why you felt the need to have this map on the table as well in terms of, it looks like there's some, in the central part of the city is the main difference. And I guess if you could just describe to me what you think the key advantages or benefits of this map was, where some of the other things look very similar, but what you changed or why, or what turned out differently and why, if that's a fair question to ask.
Councilman Taurus?
Yeah, sure, I can take a stab at that. One is that 5 goes north as opposed to west into Cherry Creek and Country Club, which is what
Sorry,
map.
I couldn't hear you. Could you speak
Sorry,
up?
better. I'll lean into the microphone. How about that? So one of the big differences is District 5 going north. And that gave us an opportunity to respond to community feedback that North Park Hill and South Park Hill not be split somewhere in the middle of that neighborhood. So that was one way of us being able to do that. And it also kept Colorado Boulevard as kind of a geographic boundary line for the entire district. So between that and District 10. I think the other is kind of big picture, keeping communities diverse as well. Like we want to retain majority minority districts, and we do for the 3 that we have now. With this map also adds one. But keeping communities diverse in experience, diverse in demographics and composition is also one important piece. And I think, you know, to some of the comments before, even in housing type and land use, I think is an important thing to have one district that's almost entirely multifamily. It might feel synergistic, but I think there is an important tug at policy when you have communities that have to understand and appreciate what another part of its district might be going through. Let's see. Differences. I think many are the same around the perimeter, but it really was the residual of trying to keep some of the Park Hill neighborhoods whole that led the map in the way that it ended up for the 4 most changed neighborhoods between those 2 maps, 9, 8, 10, and 5.
And I would just add that historically, Council District 9 has wrapped down into downtown Denver. That has been historic throughout all of the maps when we went through the mapping process. And for me, I felt that was an important aspect of Map E compared to Map D, is to keep somewhat of downtown Union Station, that area, within Council District 9. And I had also heard from some communities that historically Colorado Boulevard had been that boundary, and so just respecting those.
That's very helpful. I really appreciate it. I've been very quiet in this process. Many of my colleagues, you all have taken the leadership on the map creation, and I've appreciated, you know, getting questions answered and giving, you know, a little bit of perspective here and there. You know, I am an at-large representative, but I also live in North Park Hill, and so it's been interesting to try to change hats, right, with both perspectives from all the maps. And you know, I think that it's been interesting to think about which part of Park Hill goes with another part of Park Hill the most, and then which district is it best in. And so it's interesting. There's a trade-off, right? I see the advantage of you keeping North and South Park Hill whole in your map. I also don't know that I think that there is as much affinity with the rest of District 5 as there is with District 9 in terms of traditional African American neighborhoods being able to, you know, be joined together, you know, with Whittier and Cole and Clayton in Map D. And so it's, you know, there's always a give and take. I did share the feedback with Councilman Herndon that if you have to split the neighborhoods, I do think there is I mean, it's not necessarily that the people west of Monaco and the people east of Monaco are different, but there is a different community anchor, right? You know, it's Oneida Street east of Monaco is the business district, and it actually does have a fair bit of Central Park interplay in terms of the community interaction and how it works. And, you know, the center of gravity west of Monaco tends to be Kearney. And, you know, it's just, so it's not to say that it wouldn't be best for all of it to stay together, but I think I've struggled through the entire process thinking about where Park Hill, like Montbello, if you think of Northeast, North, and South Park Hill, as, you know, the greater Park Hill folks would say that's one Park Hill, but it's like Montbello. You put the three together and you're at more than 30,000 residents, I think, when I counted before I left. I've forgotten some of the numbers that I pulled up, but it's similarly a mega area like Montbello is, and therefore it's virtually impossible to keep all together in any map to make all of the other goals that we have work. So I'm mostly thinking out loud and sharing the things that I have brought perspective, in part because so many of these maps have talked about Park Hill, and as someone who lives there, I feel like it's important to share, I think, the pros and cons of each thing. And so I do think that it is, I have heard loud and clear how critical it is for Northeast Park Hill to stay together. That neighborhood has really built a lot of new and recent infrastructure for engagement that has really been trying to revitalize the civic infrastructure, not the development, not the land, but the engagement of people. And so, you know, the work that's happening there, I think gets really set back if Northeast Park Hill is split in half. So I for sure cannot support a map that splits that neighborhood, given the challenges and the cohesion that's building. I think that I could not support, but I do appreciate, you know, the challenges everyone had and why everyone had to choose, you know, something. And so for me, I feel a little better with Park Hill being with District 9 than I do with District 5 in terms of commonality of interests and African-American traditional communities being able to stay connected, even as the demographics change. That history is there, right? The schools, we have one of the greatest elementary schools with a Black leader in North Park Hill, and it's really, you know, that school is a pride in the community. There's a Northeast schools committee, and, you know, they've spent a lot of energy at Hallett trying to build community around that. And that, to me, feels a lot more similar to other parts of District 9 than it might to the kind of, you know, conversations happening in the lower part of District 5. So with that, I'm leaning at this point towards supporting Map D. Wanted to just share that publicly because I haven't really shared much of my positions going into the committee meeting and why. But I'll continue to take another look, and, you know, happy to continue hearing from everyone with the maps that were presented today. So thanks.
Thank you. And I see I have two other colleagues in the queue. I just want to do a time check. We have 7 minutes. And so for all of those who are watching, next week we will have all of these maps. So it looks like we have Map A, we'll have Map D, Draft 2, and Map E, Draft 2 in bill form, and we'll be moving them out of committee. Map C, Plan C, unless it gets formally withdrawn. So sorry about that. Map A, Map C, Map D, Draft 2, and Map E, we would have in bill draft form next week to talk about them and also move them out of committee. So we don't have to finish this conversation just now since we had technical difficulties. And with that, Councilwoman Sawyer, go ahead with your comments or questions.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wanted to acknowledge on this map and kind of walk through. So historically, South Park Hill was represented in District 5. And in fact, when I came into office and the East Area Plan was happening, there was a whole conversation with a number of residents about the fact that South Park Hill was in District 8 now as of 2010, right? So I think Councilwoman Taurus hit on it. You know, there were, based on the numbers, there were two options for what could happen to District 5. One is to go west into Cherry Creek and Country Club. The other is to go north into South Park Hill and North Park Hill. and keep those together. So either of those options are a great option in terms of all different kinds of community feedback. Both maps keep East Colfax and Northeast Park Hill and very much of, or part of Montbello, as much of Montbello as possible in the same area. So, you know, it does what needs to be done in terms of community feedback and representation. The one issue with Map E that I have is the same thing we just talked about with when we talked through Map D and why it is I'm supporting Map D. So Map E cuts District 5 at Alameda, and the Orthodox Jewish community in District 5 has, you know, specifically, so there's an extraordinary history there. I can't remember the Yiddish term for it, but the rope that goes around the area that's blessed by the rabbis so that the Orthodox Jewish community can use wheels on Saturday, although no electricity. I apologize, I cannot remember the name of it. But anyway, it goes around District 5, almost exactly. And so, you know, on the north side of Alameda, they're building a traditional bathhouse. On the south side of Alameda, we have the Meisel Museum. We have a number of synagogues. So splitting District 5 at Alameda doesn't do what we want it to do with respect to that Orthodox Jewish community, and Map D does. And so that was really the trade-off, right? Is do we go up into North Park Hill and keep Park Hill whole, but separate the Orthodox Jewish community north and south of Alameda? Or do we go west into Cherry Creek and Country Club so that we can then, based on the numbers, keep the Orthodox Jewish community in Southern District 5 together? And I supported Map D specifically with the changes that Councilman Cashman and I proposed, specifically because it does achieve the goal of keeping the Orthodox Jewish community together in Southern, that currently exists in Southern District 5. So just wanted to walk through that when it comes to this map as well. I think both are great options. It's just that one piece of consideration at the southern border of District 5 again. And unfortunately, because those are such big precincts, now there's no way to do that differently. So in my opinion, Map D is slightly better because of that issue with the Orthodox community in Southern District 5. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilman Hines?
Thank you, Committee Chair. I've mentioned this before, but this map for District 10 has both Cherry Creek, the economic engine of Cherry Creek North, and the economic engine of downtown. And it would be I think it would be difficult to represent both adequately because they're both very strong. They both have their particular demands and desires, and they're in competition with one another. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Hines. Councilman Sitabaca?
Thank you. I actually can see some changes to this map that can make it better, but I do think that this is the better map between D and E right now because of some of those reasons. I think that those interests mentioned by Councilman Hines are still the very heavy moneyed interests that outweigh other people's voices whenever they're mixed with them. And so I do like the way that it kind of gives them their own very distinct voice so that they're not actively silencing any of our nest neighborhoods or extremely marginalized populations. And I do like how this one keeps Northeast Park Hill all together and with East Colfax. That makes much more sense to me. I have to disagree with Councilwoman Kinich. I live in District 9 and I have family all over Park Hill, both Northeast and North Park Hill, and there is very little in common with the rest of D9 and South Park Hill or North Park Hill. And so I would be able to get behind this map with a couple of small changes. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all for this very robust discussion. I knew it would come down to today and next week, where we were able to talk about this all together and talk about the merits or as one of my colleagues always reminds me, the benefits and the burden to all of the work that we do. And I think this is some of the hardest work that we do as council members. Is in the report, there were comments that disregarded other comments. There were contrary comments throughout the whole entire report. And so it's our responsibility up here to make sure that we are leading with our values and responding to community. So I would thank all of you up here for participating in this robust conversation, having patience with the very, very tight timeline, and giving me the ability to lead this participating in communities of interest report. And I think hopefully having a guidebook for those who come before after us in 10 years on how to do this in a different way, even though we guide this process. So thank you all. With that, next week, we will have 4 maps: Map A, Map C, Map D amended, and Map E amended into bills. And we will hopefully be moving a bill out of committee, and then it will go on first reading March 21st, and we will have our final public hearing Tuesday, March 29th. With that, we're adjourned, and I'll see you next week.